Hello and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed speed networking. I certainly did. I met some of you from Texas, from California, talked about all the things we're doing, and oh my gosh, we are an amazing community doing spectacular things to reimagine work. I am so excited by all the people who are here. And our next session is also going to be very exciting. It features John Foster from TrueCar. John is the Chief People Officer at TrueCar Inc. He is responsible for organizational effectiveness, talent management, recruiting, talent development, and human resources operations. In a career spanning over 20 years, he has served in executive leadership roles at some of the world's most innovative companies, including Chief Human Resources Officer at Hulu and IDEO, and various leadership roles at Levi Strauss, Fidelity Investments, and Citibank. Now let's go to John.
Hey everyone, how you doing? Nice to see you out there today. Happy to be here and share some of the work I've been doing lately. In this presentation, I'm going to reframe the current return to work debates as a kind of unique opportunity for workplace innovation. Show how human-centered design can help you create a sustainable, high-performing workplace, and even talk about what that means. And then I just want to share that while based on research and a lot of this stuff has deep roots in really solid defensible work, I'm a designer, builder, operator, and this is work that I'm using in techniques that I'm using in my actual work as a chief people officer. So let's dive in and start checking this stuff out. So lots of business leaders and employees, all of us are wondering if the COVID pandemic has caused a permanent shift to digital or virtual world where all of our work looks kind of like this. If anybody just freaked out and thought they were in a Zoom call, I apologize, just a screenshot. There certainly have been a ton of benefits to this new style of work, from eliminating commutes and improved flexibility, but also some drawbacks. For example, the negative impact on working moms is very troubling. The COVID impact is driving a disproportionate number of women out of the workplace, which is setting back recent trends and moving us backwards and disrupting professional trajectories. There are other things that haven't been going so well either. But, still we're now talking about this return to work kind of strategy, and LinkedIn and Nightly News, if you've ever watched it, there's all kinds of stories now about how we're going to return to work. And I'm wondering, but weren't we working this whole time? So why are we calling it return to work? I find many of the trade-off discussions, the pre-COVID versus post-COVID and working from home versus working in the office, just too simplistic to capture the challenge. Here's an interesting chart that I've seen. This is one of many I've seen. I think we're doing ourselves a great disservice if we think workplace issues are just a binary question. This is just a survey that shows how no real strong adherent to any particular preference of should we work 1 day, should we work 2 days, 3 days in the office. Yet this stuff's getting a lot of attention, and it's sort of like clickbait to see who's going to come up with a new work week. Is it going to be 5 days or 4 days or 3 days? What exactly is that? I think it's mostly a bunch of fluff, actually. So let's be careful about that and start thinking about these things a little bit more with more sophistication. And if you're going to be a designer or a leader in this space, you kind of have to understand a lot more of the dynamics involved. I mean, where we work is certainly an interesting and important design challenge, but it's a blend of other things as well. It's not just home and office. Maybe it's travel. If we're working, some people have been traveling for work for decades, if not centuries. And there's other types of work. What about during commutes or other places, third places? And actually, it's really not just where we work, it's how we work and what we work on. We have all these great words like virtual and asynchronous and distributed and remote, work from home and HQ. And I'm starting to look at those really closely and wonder like which language we're going to pick, because our precise language is going to help us actually focus on our intentions and make sure they're delivered. For example, the word remote kind of means you're not important. So if you're a remote first workplace, are you saying no one's important? If you're using the word work from home, isn't that sort of directionally the wrong thing? It's actually work at home. So maybe a little silly to get that picky, but I also think linguistics really signal our intentions. So as we get more disciplined in our language, it might be because we suddenly noticed a bunch of new things about work that we didn't notice before. I'm pretty certain that meetings were always pretty messed up. I've been in a lot of meetings in corporate environments, and Many of them didn't have agendas, had dominant speakers, had people that went on and on with topics that were off track. No decisions were made. These were typical meetings, but somehow they were fine because they were at work. And then suddenly we go into a Zoom environment and a meeting is intolerable if it doesn't have an agenda or if someone speaks too much. And this is a chart to help explain that. What we've done is become conscious of our incompetence. And that's a really great state to be in, actually. It's a place of opportunity and of learning. So if we can use this window of opportunity to take advantage of a lot of things that we've never questioned before, we might be able to actually design new things for the workplace that are suddenly leaps and bounds better than what we had before. So one way to do that is just zoom out, say, okay, what exactly are we trying to do here? We're trying to create a workplace strategy. And a fresh way of looking at it is a phrase I call the dynamic workplace. It's a complete shift in thinking about talent organization that includes three main pillars. There's an underlying fundamental focus on employee instead of employer. And the first pillar is a basic agreement between an employer and employer. What is the value proposition? Is it reciprocal? Is this working for both of us? Fundamental questions about how we work, where we work, this idea of flexible workspaces where you work maybe sometimes at home, maybe sometimes in an office or else in some kind of other place. Flexibility is key in that situation. And then there's the idea of a curated employee experience. What can help us think more about the things going on around you? Your physical setup, is it ergonomic? Are you feeling well? Do you have stress? Do you have noise? Are you connected to other people around you? All of these things have become very, very center and front and center now as we start to think about how workplaces work. Last thing I'd like to say about the strategy is it's grounded in the idea of, or the strategy of self-determination theory. It's more popularized in the book Drive by Dan Pink. If you're curious about it, you can check out that book. But the idea is that people want adults that are mature and sort of want something in life. They want to feel competent. They want to have some autonomy or choice or control, and they want to build relationships with others. When you build those things into your workplace strategy, you're actually working with intrinsic motivators, which are far more powerful than things like pay and other types of stimulants from the outside. So let's now talk a little bit about how do you know if it's working, or what's the big picture outcomes, and how do we measure this kind of stuff? I like to think of it as a layer upon layer approach of standards of excellence. At the base level, no matter where you're working, one of the most important things is to have psychological safety. This is sort of, it's mandated by law, actually, in a lot of places with sexual harassment types of laws and other types of safety things, even as we've seen around COVID and public health. Psychological safety is sort of a requirement if you're going to even show up to work and feel like you can interact successfully. The next level above that is the one we spend a lot of our time in. It's maybe the most dominant aspect of people who design things for work. It has a lot to do with efficiency and effectiveness and how we get stuff done. And I'd say when you do these two things, you're dealing with what's essentially a minimum viable organization. A lot of the startups I've worked with get this far and they aspire to be a better workplace, but often can't get past these first two steps. Really great design takes us to a new level. It takes us into a level of excellence I call engagement. Borrowing that term from the Gallup organization. We'll talk more about this in depth in a little bit, but it's really about being effective at people management. The next layer above that, sustainability. Are people going to be able to stay in this mode of work and operate effectively over time? Do they feel well? Do they burn out? That's when you're starting to think about sustainability. Finally, you have transcendence, which is when your organization actually delivers more than it's intended to do. It's about being bigger than just a company, and essentially what a lot of people call a triple bottom line company, where you're working with the shareholders, the employees, and your customers, and they're all getting value from the organization. So that's just a nice framework to think about what are you doing and how do you measure it. Let's move into some of the techniques that we might go through to build for this new workplace, this idea of a dynamic workplace that has a new value proposition. It has flexible locations and styles of working, and it has a curated employee experience that helps you actually deliver human-centered supports. One way to think about this is you need to build with these three dimensions in mind at all times. A quality design strategy has to include people, process, and technology in order for it to be actually a full impact type of thing. Many of us talk about buying software. Well, this model actually came from enterprise software back in the 60s, where they thought, if you just install the software, you're not actually going to get a change in behavior because you have to focus on the people. You might have to change the way you do things as well. So you're talking about people and the roles and responsibilities. You're talking about the process, which is the sequence and the orchestration of activities. And you're also talking about the tools that you use to get things done in the methods. So that's the full toolkit of a builder who's trying to make a workplace better in one way or another. So now let's dig in a little bit to the different components of those standards of excellence. When we talked about psychological safety, I gave a quick overview, but this is a little bit deeper. And for those of you that aren't aware, there's a woman named Amy Edmondson at Harvard University who's really been the champion of psychological safety lately. She's got a great book called The Fearless Organization. Again, if you're not aware of this particular topic, it's a great one to check it out. But basically, psychological safety is the idea that it's about the individual's perceptions and about taking risks in the work environment. And interpersonal risks are a requirement to actually interact with others because you have to ask questions, you have to give advice. And each of those two fundamental elements of dialogue are actually risky for people. What if I'm wrong? What will happen? If I do something around here, how will I be treated? Will I be embarrassed or will I be hurt? Will I be criticized? Will people make fun of me? It seems like you're talking about junior high behavior, but actually most of us have experienced quite a lot of this in the workplace. So psychological safety is something that really has a bunch of dimensions to it when you're trying to design or build for it. You certainly want to have policies and enforcement behaviors, but you also need to think about leadership behavior, the kinds of communications you put out, the kinds of things that are reinforced. A lot of our DEI work that's happening out there in the world around inclusion has a lot to do with psychological safety. Do people feel welcome? Do they feel respected? So thinking about this as an area where you can really have an impact in the dynamic workplace is a really interesting build opportunity. Next, let's dig into probably the dominant aspect of most of the work I've been involved in, at least in the startup world, when you're trying to put in the basics of an HR infrastructure, and you're looking at buying software and you're looking at all your workplace practices. A lot of it's really about being efficient and effective. And I think COVID's really broken open a major paradigm because up until we were forced to work from home, a lot of business leaders were reluctant to think about distributed work and the idea that someone could be individually located somewhere and still be high performing, be productive, be efficient, and actually get work done. I think through this forced experiment, now we have some evidence that's firsthand that people will look at. Despite the decades of other evidence we already had, now it's firsthand, and I think people are open to this idea. So let's think about some of the types of things you look at when you're doing this. One of the first most obvious is just the idea that getting things done to improve speed, lower the effort, increase volume, the kinds of things we do when we're thinking about moving from writing by hand with a pen and a quill back in the 1700s to a typewriter that improved efficiency and helped people get more done in a single day. And now we're at computer level work where you can even talk to your computer and get a lot done. So this is an example of improvements in efficiency and effectiveness to do more with less. The next one is the idea of improving accuracy. One of the most interesting, more accurate things I've seen come out recently is the idea that video-based interviewing with all sorts of AI around it can actually improve the accuracy of a hire. It's actually way more impactful and accurate than a live interview, which are oftentimes less than 50% accurate, which is kind of hard to believe. You could flip a coin and decide after an interview, should I hire this person? And you'll be right up there with the average effectiveness. So having new tools that do different things that we couldn't do before by evaluating facial expressions or natural language programming and things like that, they can discover patterns that you can't do in a normal human interview. So that's the idea of improving accuracy. I'm sure you can think of many other examples. Another one is the idea of bridging gaps. So if we were going to work from home maybe 15 years ago, it would have been very difficult to connect. The internet wasn't as strong. We had telephones, we had cell phones. I think 15 years ago they were around, but we didn't have something as powerful as Zoom. So it happened to be interesting that at the time COVID impacted us, video conferencing was already established. We already had FaceTime. We already had Google Chats. We had other types of doing this. Zoom happens to get the Kleenex award for the dominant phrase, but there's actually quite a bunch of platforms already in place that bridge the gap that being in person didn't let you have. So that's another type of improvement around efficiency or effectiveness. Bottom line, we think about a lot of this stuff when we're building it. We try to measure things like how often is it done? Is everyone using it? Is it easy to use? Do people like it? Are we getting our results done? These are typical types of metrics we use to look at the efficiency and effectiveness type stuff. And when you're thinking about any of this stuff you've heard about today, you certainly want to be measuring and tracking this. One word we often use at this point, especially in software, is the idea of engagement. I want to point out that there's in the world of HR and people management, there's a particular precise reason we use the word engagement, and it's a little bit different than sort of participation. So I want to dig into that. As one of these standards of excellence is really about, are people willing to give discretionary effort? And I used this photo as an intro because, frankly, who would climb the rock wall, even in a gym, let alone Half Dome or something crazy out there where you're really up high and it's scary? And it really, the answer is, it's a choice. Someone decides to do this because they want to do it. It's there, as they say. And it's really purely about discretionary effort. So what you really want to do when you're in this zone of excellence and you're trying to build for this type of thing is think, how can I help people give more of their own creative thought? How can I help people be more independent? How can I help people make better decisions so that they can be more independent of controlling forces like policies and supervisors and people who are telling you what to do? Because as soon as that one way sort of hierarchical thing breaks down, organizations really suffer. They can't solve problems. They deliver poor service. So independence, autonomy, and discretionary effort are a really high standard organization. In order to do that, you really have to be human-centered. So the idea of engagement was brought to the table originally by the Gallup organization in the late 90s. They did a ton of research on their decades of satisfaction surveys, and they discovered that there was very little correlation between the typical employee satisfaction survey and the type of performance outcomes they were looking for. So their whole business was kind of under threat in terms of it's not relevant. And they did a meta study to discover that actually 12 questions, what they call the Q12, correlate very highly with relevant business outcomes. And it turns out that these are the things that are about your relationship with each other. They're about your feelings, and they're highly correlated with business outcomes. And that's the signal that we're looking for. And what it looks like is something like this. Maybe many of you have answered these questions at this point. A lot of companies use an engagement survey. And the point is, you're trying to find out, do we manage our people well enough that they are willing to give their best? That's the bottom line of that layer. Tons of opportunities to design building tools and resources for the dynamic workplace on this standard. Now let's dig into sustainability. This one is really, I think, personal and familiar. I don't know how many of you have started taking naps in the afternoon, but I definitely do. And part of it is because we have this new thing called Zoom fatigue, probably unfortunate for Zoom, but video fatigue. Looking at a one-dimensional screen is not what our brains were designed to do. So it makes us tired. We get worn out. There's other types of things around sustainability, obviously, but these are the kinds of things that companies are starting to notice really matter. When employees are burned out and leave and you have high turnover, you're not sustainable. You're spending a lot of money on churn, same as you do with customers. So understanding the concept of wellness and being well is really critical at this standard of excellence for an organization. If you can figure out a way to achieve supports and build supports for all of these types of things, then you're really going to create an environment where employees can thrive. And when they're giving discretionary effort and they can thrive, you're starting to get an unbelievable force in human ingenuity. That's this type of stuff we're talking about. Can you feel like you're achieving? Do you feel like this is a nice place to be? Do you get energy from your work? Do you feel safe? We talked about that one. Are you building connections? And you have chances to give of yourself. It's kind of a natural human instinct to want to be somewhat philanthropic. So when you see these HR programs and policies out there and these types of new platforms that are coming up for people to give donations or volunteer and they're attached to work, there's a legitimate sustainability element of that where you feel like you're doing something that matters and you're connecting to your community on top of the work that you're doing. The challenge with wellness is it's dynamic. This zigzaggy line I've got up here is about what it feels like on a typical day. You feel well, you don't feel well. You feel well, you don't feel well. You go back and forth. And it could be on any one of these different dimensions. So it's extremely difficult to manage, but it's something that I think is really causing a lot of workplace designers to really get creative and start thinking about what can they do to help make sure people are on the upswing as much as possible. finally, I want to look at the idea of transcendence. And for many companies, this is simply out of reach. There's very few companies that I know growing up in my like sort of 80s, 90s that were really even considering this as something that they should do. More recently, CEOs have been asked, what do they think their companies are for? And gradually over time, it's less just about shareholder value, less just about making money, and more about doing something good for the planet. Are we green? Do we support the right social justice initiatives? The kinds of things you've seen coming out recently from some different companies about how, no, we're not going to talk about any of this stuff. We're going to just focus on work. Those are choices companies have to make. And as you think about designing for this level and building a company that can achieve this type of outcome, it's really about thinking about how do we help ourselves move from the idea that I am the subject or I am the world has placed me in a spot and it's unchangeable. This is my self-concept that I'm either this kind of person or that kind of person, to thinking about it the opposite way. And this is what Jim Collins has described as a level 5 leader in his book, Good to Great. If you want to be great, you kind of need to get to transcendence. You have to do more for the world than you simply do when you make money. And that means you have to be an individual. When I did my earlier work in leadership development, we used to always say individual change precedes organizational change. So you think about leadership development and helping people grow to a more mature state where they can think about bigger things. They can't be caught up in those lower levels of excellence. If you're too busy just trying to be efficient, it's hard to also think about how can our efficiency serve the world beyond our current stakeholders. So that's oops, I guess I had an extra build there, sorry. That's the summary of what we're working on here is organizations have choices about what they're going to build for. There's the bottom line stuff that most of us have to deal with just in order to function as a business and be a minimum viable organization. Then there's the human-centered stuff that helps you become a really powerful force that can make things happen in the world and change the way everyone experiences it, not just your key stakeholders. So I hope this has been helpful to you. It's a lot to jump in and stuff into a quick presentation, but it's the stuff I use to help frame my work and at TrueCar and in other places where I've been. And I'd be happy to share this, in offline and other ways if we can. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you for listening. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Tatiana.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you for bringing your discretionary effort to us and helping us understand how to build that human piece into the technology that we're implementing in our companies. So that was awesome.